Welcome to the Jay Kim Show. This is your host, Jay Kim. I am an investor, author, and fitness entrepreneur, and for the first time in Asia, I sit down with the world's most brilliant minds in business, investing, and entrepreneurship. You'll learn all the secrets, strategies, and formulas to becoming a successful entrepreneur directly from the masters. If this is your first time listening, thank you for stopping by. This podcast is produced every week with the goal of providing actionable insight to you, the listener, with every single episode. And now, on to the show. Today's guest is Patrick Lee, co-founder of Hobo Labs, which is a mobile gaming company. But he's probably best known for being one of the founders of what is probably the most popular movie review website in the world, and that's called Rotten Tomatoes. I'm sure you've heard of it. Patrick shares with us his story of how it took him nearly 10 years to graduate from college because he was too busy building companies on the side. He's a very seasoned serial entrepreneur who's on his 6th startup now, and he's been through multiple market bubbles, crashes, and company exits. And he shares with us some valuable advice to startup founders at the end of the episode. Let's jump right in. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us on the Jay Kim Show. Really appreciate your time. For our audience that perhaps has not heard of who you are or hasn't heard of what you've done, maybe you could give us a little quick intro and introduce yourself to the audience here in Asia.
Sure. My name is Patrick Lee. Born in the States, born in LA, grew up in Maryland, went to school out in UC Berkeley. Did a whole number of startups, 6 at the moment. The most well-known was a movie review site called Rotten Tomatoes, where I was a co-founder and the former CEO. We sold it to IGN Entertainment back in 2004. I went to China, did something there that was similar to like a Yelp. Went to Hong Kong, worked on a startup there called Alive Not Dead, working with a little bit like a MySpace, working with different celebrities and artists across Asia to connect to their fans. And now in the Bay Area, working on a new startup called Hobo Labs, making mobile games.
Wow. Okay. I actually didn't know about Alive Not Dead. I probably should have known that, but I've heard of the brand, but I didn't know that you were behind it. Mm-hmm. Cool. So six startups. So you're pretty born and bred. Sort of. This is what you feel like you're meant to do. Now, was Rotten Tomatoes your very first startup?
It was actually our third.
It was your third. Okay, so maybe you can backtrack a little bit and tell us about how you decided that you wanted to become a startup founder / entrepreneur, and what led you to that point in your life.
I had some different friends I knew from the first 2 years of college at Berkeley, and I guess we were kind of getting bored of school a little bit, and we wanted to try doing some different things. And at the time, one of our friends was really good at using the Usenet and some of these other things to find deals on computer hardware. So we decided to start up our own computer retail business selling, computer systems and components. So we made a website. We kind of spread by word of mouth, and people would place orders with us for either parts or systems. Pay us in advance. We'd go drive down, put the orders in, drive down to South Bay and buy the parts. And then we would come back and build the systems and sell it to them.
Wow. So this is Web 1.0. This is probably what?
93, I think.
Wow. Okay. All right. So you were on the forefront. I don't think I even knew what the internet was back then. I think my first exposure was in 97-ish. But so this was e-commerce 1.0.
Yeah, this is super early. I think eBay and stuff they were relatively new at that point, I believe. Yahoo had just started. And yeah, back then, we probably should have jumped really into the internet at that point, but we were much more just we wanted to do some sort of business. It seemed like the easiest one to kind of get into. And we went and got our own apartment. 3 of us shared the apartment, and we put the inventory there. Sometimes we'd buy extra inventory, leave it, in a locker in our apartment. And we found that was actually difficult because things like CPUs and memory would drop in value very quickly during that time. And so, even holding on to something for like a week or two, we would be losing money. But it was a good experience in terms of like just learning to kind of manage inventory, reaching customers, fulfilling orders, etc.
Right. And so how did that one end up in the end?
We ended up stopping it, but then later on, one of the four, I did it with three other guys, so four of us total. One of the other guys, Jimmy, he ended up restarting it, brought me back on. We ended up getting a deal with Asus computers. They like make motherboards and a bunch of other stuff, and to help do maintenance for them on their website for like I think it was like 7,000 a month contract, because Jimmy and I had actually worked there over the summer, where we were like part of their tech support team, and so they kind of outsourced it to us. We relaunched it, but then a couple months in, I ended up leaving because he had brought in all these other partners. They actually got a actual real storefront, and then I left to go and do my second company, which was doing like web design.
So you were in school, and then when you started doing the startup stuff, and you were like, okay, this is actually, there's something to it here, even though the first might not have worked out the way you planned. Was there any sort of pushback from your family about, when you left to go? I mean, you stopped studying, right? And you just started working full time doing your startup?
Well, I was kind of on and off on school while I was doing the startups. So I basically did 2 years worth of school, then convinced the other three guys to leave school. In the end, I think only two of us ended up graduating, and it took me basically 10 years to finish the last 2 years worth of school, because I would take classes on and off, or take a year or two off if I got busy, go back, take summer classes. And that was over the course of 3 different startups. So the first one selling computer systems components, the second one doing web design, and the third one being Rotten Tomatoes. So after we sold Rotten Tomatoes, I went back for a semester, finished up, and then I went to Asia.
Was there actually a reason, a compelling factor that made you keep going back? And I mean, at some point you must have been like, in order to be successful, I don't need a college degree. I mean, you must have realized that at some point, but something kept pulling you back to just get the degree, right?
Yeah, well, when I left school the first time, my mom was like, no, just finish your school first, then do startups. And, actually it makes a lot of sense looking back. But I was like, no, I really want to do this. And I think this is the first startup we did, we put in our own as savings. The second one, when I did the web design company, I had one other co-founder, Steven, who also ended up co-founding Rotten Tomatoes with me. And for that one, my mom and his uncle ended up loaning us money. So even though she really wanted me to finish school, when I was like, no, I really want to do this, she ended up loaning me money.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And as far as finishing, yeah, I mean, when we were doing Rotten Tomatoes, or even when we were doing the web design firm, I knew like I don't have to go and finish in order to work. Like we already had companies that were clearly making money. And because I knew when we sold Rotten Tomatoes, I wanted to move to Asia, I was like, well, I'm really close. And if I leave, I don't know if I'm ever going to come back to the Bay Area. So I might as well just take a semester, finish up first, and then go. And just to finish what I started. It wasn't so much that I felt like I needed it to get a job.
Right.
And I've actually, I studied cognitive science. I've never used any of it for any of the 6 startups I've done.
Interesting. So if someone to ask you, or if you had to give a talk or something like that about the value of a college education, what would you say?
I would say 2 things. One, all 6 startups I did were with friends from Berkeley. So every single one were with multiple different friends that I knew from the first 2 years of school. Half of them I knew through this martial arts club that I was really into called, it was a Wushu club.
Oh, cool.
And the other half were on the same floor as me freshman year. So basically people I was really close to. So I tell a lot of people, when they're like, where do I find a co-founder? I'm like, the single best place, in my opinion, to find a co-founder is while you're still in college. So I think that's a huge one. And then the second is, if you actually study something that may be relevant to eventually doing a startup, i.e. like computer science or, artificial intelligence or possibly some statistics or probability or math or something.
Okay, yeah.
Or like medical stuff, biology if you end up going biotech or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, some of those, I guess, they actually have technical knowledge that you might need. I mean, I was a business major, and that was pretty much useless. I mean, I don't remember anything, and nor did I apply anything. It was all on the job training whenever I graduated or whatever. But no, that's pretty interesting. Okay, and so let's go now to the startup that you're probably most famous for, or people will probably know you most for, is Rotten Tomatoes. And so that, again, was with a couple of your classmates or dorm mates. How did that idea come about?
So yeah, I guess stepping back a little bit, our second company was a web design firm called Design Reactor.
Right.
I did that with Steven, who I knew through Wushu. And we also had one other guy. I mean, we had a whole team of people, but one of our creative directors was this person, Sen Duong, who was a huge movie buff. Our design firm, we ended up doing a lot of work for the entertainment industry. Disney Channel, Warner Brothers, ABC, MTV, VH1, Artisan Entertainment. We originally started doing a lot of different kinds of websites, even like dentist website or tech companies, etc. And we found that they were really boring. We just didn't care about doing those. And we just gravitated. We got an opening into Disney. We ended up just focusing on all entertainment. We didn't take anything else if it wasn't entertainment, or if it came through, we'd pass it to other design firms because we found like that was something we were really interested in. So anyways, while we were running this design firm, Sen came up with the idea for Rotten Tomatoes on the side. Basically, the idea for it was, back in the day, I think they still do it now, but back in the day, you would get a newspaper and you would see these full-page ads for movies. They'd basically be a movie poster with a bunch of quotes all over it.
Right.
And it didn't matter if the movie was actually good or not. The quotes would always be positive. And so if the movie was really good, the quotes would be from famous film critics like Roger Ebert.
Right.
If the movie was bad, it would be like quotes from like random radio station DJs in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes even fake.
Yeah.
And so his idea was like, well, what if I do the same thing but include all the quotes, like good and bad? And so he just started doing this on the side in his spare time. Back then, a lot of reviews weren't even on the web. So he would go to the library and he would actually go look up the quotes in magazines and newspapers and then, enter the quotes in without any link to anything because they didn't go anywhere.
Oh, wow.
They weren't on the web.
Wow.
And yeah, he launched it, and almost immediately we were hosting for him. It started getting noticed, like, cool site of the day, week, month, etc. Links from Netscape, links from Yahoo. And yeah, it started kind of picking up traffic almost immediately, all organic. He didn't buy any ads or anything like that. And at first, Steven and I were a little bit against it because it was affecting his work because, he'd be busy like every night, especially, if the movies come out on Friday, he'd be super busy Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes pulling all-nighters. And so then he would be like coming into work late or getting sick or sometimes not showing up. And so we were like, hey, this is like, we have all these projects that we have deadlines for. This is not cool.
Yeah.
But, over the course of like the next year, we kind of came around. We're like, you know what, actually, this is interesting. Maybe we should run it as a business.
So what year was this? This was late 90s?
So yeah, he started in 98, the site. And within a year or so, we were like, the traffic kept growing. There was an article for this magazine called Yahoo Internet Life, where Roger Ebert wrote an article picking out his favorite movie sites. And he picked out 20 or so sites, and Rotten Tomatoes was one of them.
Nice.
He also had a day where, pretty soon after the launch, where we noticed a big spike in traffic. It was a day that A Bug's Life came out, and when we kind of looked into the IP addresses, we realized it was actually coming from Pixar. Oh. And from what we could tell, someone at Pixar probably found our page, sent it to everyone else at Pixar, and they were just refreshing like crazy to see as we added more reviews on. And so there's a couple things like that where we're like, hey, people in the film industry are actually using this site. Maybe we should run this as a business. So January 2000, I went out, raised money. We basically brought Sen in, made him like a co-founder of the design firm, and we kind of became co-founders of Rotten Tomatoes. So the three of us became the co-founders of both. Then we actually found another group to take over our design firm. So we transitioned everything over to that group so we could focus on Rotten Tomatoes. I went out, raised $1 million US for it. and we decided to run it, as our full-time thing.
That's awesome.
And we actually transitioned something like 20-something people from our design firm over to Rotten Tomatoes. But then, 2 months after we raised in March 2000, the market crashed like big time. And we very quickly had to like cut staff down to 7 and bootstrap like crazy.
Yeah, so you were doing all genres of movies, or was it initially like a certain genre and then you just decided, oh, we have to do everything?
Oh, well, so the beauty of movies is pretty much if you focus on just the wide release movies, it's only like, usually like 3 or 4 movies a week.
Right.
So it was very easy to keep up with that.
Gotcha.
And over time we added like the limited release movies. We added started going backwards into like the DVDs and older stuff. We had actually started licensing data from other sources. We started creating like parsers to go out and grab reviews from all the different sites that were popping up with movie reviews to make things a little bit more automated. But initially we were just focused on what movies are coming out each week, what wide release movies are coming out each week. And when it's only like 3 to 5 movies a week, it's very manageable. It was very manageable.
And it didn't even require you to have to watch the movie. You just literally have to get the reviews, right?
Right.
So
we didn't write our own reviews. We just aggregated the reviews, and then we would write like a very short synopsis of the overall sentiment from all those reviews.
Right. And what exactly does Rotten Tomatoes stand for?
So the idea was basically, back in the day when if you had like a theater show or like something like that, if performance was very bad, people would throw rotten fruits and vegetables at the actors. And so Sen decided to try Rotten Tomatoes, and he got it. So
nice.
We stuck with it.
So that's very interesting. So by the time that you were out there and you decided to raise some money, that must have been like peak bubble. What was your experience fundraising? I mean, was it either they were just writing checks like, okay, that's a good idea, let's do it? Or was it, this was the first time you had raised institutional money?
So we raised $500,000 from a very small VC based in Taiwan, and everything else was angel.
Okay.
They were all contacts that we made from our design firm because we were working with folks who were doing startups, and we were helping them with their logo or their websites, and then those ones sold. And so when we're like, hey, we want to do our own company, like our own startup, everyone was very supportive of that. And so yeah, it wasn't too hard to raise the $1 million. Actually, if we had more time, and we didn't want to raise more, but I'm pretty sure we probably could have raised 2. It's hard to say though because we're hitting so close to when things burst.
Right.
So had we started 3 to 6 months earlier, and if we wanted to, I'm pretty sure at that moment we probably could have raised more. And at the time when the market crashed, we're like, oh crap, we should have raised more because we had to cut down headcount. We had to sublease some of our space. Not only did we cut to 7 people, everyone had to take a 30% pay cut. 2 of us went to 0 salary, myself and one of our marketing guys.
Wow. And
we kind of compensated people with more equity depending on how much they took, of a pay cut they took.
Right.
And for myself, it was like something like 6 months I just slept under the desk in our office because we had a 5-year lease. We were like maybe 2 years in.
Wow.
And we couldn't get out.
You actually slept in the office.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because, we had all these cubes. And so I just took a set of 3 cubes, and then since we laid off so many people, pretty much everyone could have like 3 cubes. And so I took all 3 of them, just shoved clothes and stuff into the drawers, got a little sleeping bag, and yeah.
Man, that's as bootstrapped as it gets. So then you were able to hang in there and actually survive that sort of market crash.
Mm-hmm.
And then you found an exit a few years later, right?
Right. So pretty much about a year after the crash, we had cut down our head count over the course of that year from about 25 to 7. And at the same time, we slowly kind of increased our revenue, increased our traffic. And so I think about a year in or so, we were like at or near break even. But that was, being very bootstrappy. But then a year and a half after the market crashed, so it crashed in March 2000. In September of 2001 was 9/11.
Oh yeah.
So, and when that happened,
man,
it affected ad buying across the board because people didn't want to watch ads after something like that.
Right.
So a lot of campaigns got pulled or massively reduced.
Mm.
So for us, it was a very weird experience because we basically went through one of the worst crashes ever, I think, or a really bad one. And we also went through, I think, the worst terrorist attack ever on American soil.
Yep.
Like almost like back to back. So it was, I think for us, it was a bit traumatizing. So we didn't think kind of the way they did pre 2000 or post, 2008 or so, where everything is just like, we want to take over the world. I mean, really for us, we were just like, we just want to survive.
Right.
And even in terms of exits, we were just thinking like, oh, if we sell, we just want to make sure our investors get their money back. Like that was our goal. And looking back, we're like, wow, we totally aimed too low. But I think it was also part of the time. It was just because two very extreme things happened right as soon as we raised that I think it really kind of shrunk our thinking in our heads of what we had.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a different era, right? I mean, it was almost I don't know how to say this properly, but it was almost it was real in that your investors, their best interests were at the top of your minds. I mean, I feel like post, 05, 06, 07 ish, it's kind of like a new regime out there where you fundraise, and a lot of times you kind of, if a startup fails, and it's like, okay, sorry, it didn't work out, sorry investors, on to the next one, right? And so it's kind of changed. I think the landscape's kind of changed. Okay, so after the exit, then you said you wanted to go to Asia. So you finished up, you went back and finished up your last couple credits or whatever. And then why did you want to move to Asia?
So for me, I'm an ABC, American-born Chinese. I was born in LA. I had gone to China a couple times, for a month or so at a time, and visited, I think, Hong Kong and Japan for a couple of days, but never really lived there. And I just felt like, hey, I didn't ever do the exchange programs or anything like that. And I was just like, yeah, I want to try seeing what it's like out there. And at the time I was like, America's a little bit ahead of China as far as like the internet and everything else. We just had kind of a success under our belts from Rotten Tomatoes, so we kind of know what's going on. Maybe we can go over there and be kind of ahead of the curve.
Right.
But then, once I got there, I was like, wow, basically I didn't have any network there. I didn't understand the culture at all. It's very different from the States.
Yep.
I wasn't fluent. I was like conversational Mandarin. I couldn't really read or write.
Right.
And even like Rotten Tomatoes, very few people would have heard of it. So I thought, oh yeah, we have these advantages. But when I went there, I realized, oh no, I actually have a ton of disadvantages. So ended up raising some money, worked with one of the guys I did my first company with, Jimmy, on this company there. Even brought one of my co-founders, Steven, along with me to work on the startup. But, very quickly, Steve and I were like, wow, we just don't know what we're doing. And so we kind of relied on Jimmy to run the company.
Was the idea already in the works from before? Was it an idea that you had spawned before that you were like, okay, when we exit Rotten Tomatoes, we're going to work on this right away?
Actually, I was interested in doing a dating site there. I found online dating to be kind of interesting. I had a friend also from Berkeley who had a company called Hot or Not.
Yeah.
And he had similar traffic to what we had at Rotten Tomatoes when we were both running our companies at that time. But he was making a lot more revenue than we were. He had a small dating component to Hot or Not that, maybe 100,000 people were subscribed, paying $5 a month. But that's, $6 million a year plus advertising revenue. So they were doing probably 8 or 9 million, maybe 10 million a year. And it was essentially two guys. They hired some, I think 6 more people to help run it for them. And they ended up getting a house in Hawaii, and they essentially didn't have to do anything. And it just ran itself. And we were like, wow, we're running Rotten Tomatoes. And since we were mostly based on advertising revenue, we actually constantly had to keep, building new movie sites and moving pages and actor pages, director pages to get the traffic up, try to sell ads across it. And it was just a lot more work for, a lot less revenue. And so I was like, yeah, China has so many people. Dating is going to be something that's going to be important. So I kind of actually wanted to go there and do a dating site. But then once I went there, my friend Jimmy, who I knew from Berkeley, was there already. He was working on the startup that was a little bit like a Yelp, doing merchant reviews. But then they had a machine that could do this loyalty program. So they could put the machines, these card readers into all these different stores, had these loyalty cards that could give out to people in the city, and they could go to the stores to swipe, get a discount. The merchants could kind of track the purchases and then be able to offer, coupons and deals to people based on, how often they're using a card, etc., and their purchase habits. And so I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. So I decided to go there and join them. But then, like, one big problem that we found out was that merchants would accept the card and give the discounts, but then they wouldn't swipe. And two reasons for that is, one, they didn't want to pay us anything. And then the second was they were worried that if they swiped it, the government could come in, grab our servers, and realize, how many transactions they were doing. And in China, they like to do everything cash as much as possible because they don't necessarily want to pay the full amount of tax.
Right.
And so it broke kind of the whole model because that was like the big part of the revenue.
Right.
And so, yeah, we were just like, oh, wow, like that wasn't even something that I would have even thought of, because in the States, I mean, maybe that would happen a little bit, but you look at Yelp and, generally people pay, or a lot of these other systems, because, yeah, I mean, I guess in the States, even restaurants may kind of not include like tips and stuff, but in general, I think it's not as bad as, like in China.
Yeah, that's a different ball game in China, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So at what point, I mean, what ended up happening to that startup? And then you said you were in Asia for 9 years?
Yeah, so I was in China for 3 years. It was a city called Xiamen, the part of China closest to Taiwan.
Yep.
When that model wasn't working, they kind of pivoted. We ended up buying this like local bulletin board system that was very active around that city, called XM Fish. I don't know why that name, they were using that name, but it was very popular. And then they basically went around kind of monetizing that, selling advertising across it, adding some services to it. And I think that was, keeping the company afloat. And I think it's still running it to this day. But then we basically, was the point where they weren't going to raise more money, they weren't going to sell. And so we basically got the people who were running it to, pay off the investors, a portion of what they put in originally, just to let them have some kind of exit.
Right.
And so it's still running, but it's it has a lot of competition from all these other big companies in China.
So then after Xiamen, you came to Hong Kong, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I knew a friend from the Bay Area, this guy Daniel Wu, who went to school in Oregon, but he grew up in the Bay Area, so he'd come back in the summers, and he also did wushu, so we knew each other from the Berkeley Wushu Club.
Mm.
And he went to Hong Kong to see the handover. His sister there was like a VJ or something.
Okay.
And she ended up getting him like some modeling work in Taiwan. A director there saw, I guess, some of his modeling work and decided to cast him in a movie. And then Jackie Chan, I think, saw the movie. And so they decided to sign him up into Jackie Chan's like talent agency or whatever.
Nice.
Then Daniel ended up becoming like, I think, one of the biggest movie stars in Asia.
Yeah.
And so when I was still in China, there was one time I was visiting Hong Kong, and him and a good friend of his, Terrence Yin, they approached me and they're like, hey, let's grab dinner. I'm like, okay. And when I was there, they basically pitched me on this movie idea, because Dan has, traditionally been an actor, but he wanted to direct a movie where they created a fake boy band called Alive. And they basically made a mockumentary where they filmed the boy band for 2 years. The band actually released songs, made music videos, actually went on tour for a while. It was with 4 actors, only one of them, Terrence, who could actually sing. The rest, they were all 30-something. 2 of them were already married at the time. And I guess the whole idea was they wanted to film it all and kind of as a statement about the entertainment industry, where how come you can have like 4 actors, 30-something actors, 3 of which didn't really have any talent for music, make a boy band.
That's incredible.
And for it to still be popular. And so I thought it was a cool idea. And so I put in the money to make the movie. It was very low budget because I think Daniel basically called in a lot of favors.
Right.
Everyone, all the actors and stuff were working for free. But then after the movie came out, they were like, hey, maybe, we're making a statement about the entertainment industry, but we should probably do something, not just complain about it. And so we said, hey, why don't we make kind of like a MySpace type of thing where it's about a community for artists, not just celebrities, but artists of all types, including folks behind the camera, like producers and directors and writers, etc. And not just in film, but within music and illustration, photography, etc. And so we kind of joined forces on that. So myself and Steven from Rotten Tomatoes, along with Daniel, Terrence, and the other two, Andrew and Conray from the boy band Alive, we all kind of started together to make this company. And so Steve and I moved to Hong Kong, and we launched it, and it ran for about 6 years before we decided to kind of get out. And when we started, I think it was in 2007, and it was going pretty well, and we're like, let's raise some money. And in that situation, I started a little bit too late, and we hit into 2008. We had already verbal commitments, but then after the 2008, we're like, you know what, it's not a good time to raise. And so then Steve and I just kept putting our own money in. But then similar thing happened where because of the crash, we went from 9 people, we cut down to like 4. Very bootstrappy still, managed to kind of keep it going. But over time, we were just having a little bit too much competition from all these different social media companies, not just in China, but also the States. So we were competing against, Tencent and Sina in China. We were also competing against Facebook, Instagram, YouTube in the States. And since, the celebrities were one of our big draws, but eventually they had so many fans on these other platforms that more and more of the content would start going to those other platforms. Right. And so it just made it very difficult for us. So we managed to sell to a company, MigMe, and for stock. And one of our guys is still running it, but it's kind of still like a shell of its former self.
Interesting story there with the mockumentary. I didn't know about that.
Oh, the movie is called The Heavenly Kings.
Oh, cool. I'll have to look that one up. Heavenly Kings. Okay, so now you've moved back to the Bay Area. I think that's what you said, right? And what are you working on now? And what are you working on now?
So I came back about 4 years ago. And I mainly came back because I didn't expect to be in Asia for 9 years. I thought maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe at most 5 years. And, because I was doing those companies and I was trying to make it work, I just kept putting more time and more money in. Mm-hmm. And then next thing I knew, it was almost a decade. And I was like, wow, I should probably go home to see family. And kind of the thinking I had there was, while I was in Asia, I would go back and see my mom and brother about twice a year, but only every third time my dad would also go up. And so I was only seeing my dad every year and a half. And, he was about 70 at the time. And I was like, wow, if I'm only seeing him once every 1.5 years and he's 70, it's like, do the math, how many more times are you going to see him?
Sure.
And so I was like, I should probably go home. When I went back, I had another friend that I started my first company with, Lyle. He continued doing startups as well. He ended up doing a company, Gamers.com, with his brother, Dennis Fong. That crashed, but from there his brother spun out a company called Xfire. Lyle spun out one called Lithium Technologies, which is an enterprise company. They raised $150 million and are, had a couple hundred employees, I think it was 500 employees. But I was hanging out with Lyle a lot. He was kind of getting, thinking about moving on from Lithium. He approached me and he was like, maybe let's do an enterprise company, or I want to do an enterprise company. And I said, well, you already did an enterprise company and it did really well. You don't really ever need to work again. Maybe you should just retire, or if you really want to keep working, I suggested either do something for fun or do something crazy. And for fun, I was saying stuff like make a movie, start a band, write a book, or make a game or something like that, or do something crazy like SpaceX or Tesla, really out there. And then about 2 weeks later, we were all at his house. And he had a bunch of us there, and he stood up. He's like, I know, let's make a game. And then he basically pitched us on making a game right there. And I was like, okay, because both him and I are big gamers.
Awesome.
Have been since college. And so we raised money for that and started about 3 years ago. And we launched one test game, and now we're working on the real game. It's been about 2 years. It's a synchronous multiplayer game, meaning you play with other people at the same time.
Yep.
It's like an RPG.
Nice.
But simplified, so it's like 2D, has a little bit of elements of a Diablo or one of those kind of games in there. Mm-hmm. But it's actually been pretty hard because as we've been building it, we made the mistake of just constantly increasing the scope, which is really bad, but it just kind of naturally kept happening. And so we're hoping to try and launch it like middle of this year.
Awesome. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. Where can people find you, follow you, or find you, the game and what you're doing these days?
The company's called Hobo Labs.
Hobo Labs.
So if they go to the website, they can find the game or information about the game there when we release it. If they want to follow me on social media, they can find me on Instagram or Twitter. My handle is Rotten Doubt. Rotten like Rotten Tomatoes, and Doubt like No Doubt, because I used to be a big
cool.
No Doubt fan. So I just kind of merged the two. And plus, I thought it was kind of a funny name because both, it's like a double negative.
That's true. That's true. Awesome. Thanks for your time, Patrick. I had a good time catching up. You have a very interesting story. I have a couple last questions, actually. I wanted to ask you, as someone that is 6+ startups now, serial entrepreneur type, and I just thought of this when you told me the story of telling your friend to do something crazy or do something fun and retire. Do you think that you yourself could ever retire? I mean, is there a certain point? I mean, it certainly doesn't seem like it's a number in your bank account. Is there an accomplishment that you want to achieve? Do you want to be remembered as someone other than the Rotten Tomatoes guy? Is there, is there something that you want to achieve before you maybe do something crazy or do something fun?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I never did any of these startups for money. I always did something that I thought was interesting at the time. Most of them were entertainment related. The first company was actually just to do a startup, and the one in China was just to move to Asia, really. As far as achievement, I'm like, Rotten Tomatoes is pretty good. Most likely, I'll never do anything bigger than that, and I'm okay with that. But obviously, yeah, I mean, it would be cool if I had something else that I could be known for beyond just Rotten Tomatoes. For a while when we were doing Alive Not Dead, when it's kind of at its peak and we had the movies out and stuff like that was kind of interesting. But for me, I kind of feel like I'll always be sort of floating around tech and entertainment. I don't know for sure if I'll always keep doing startups. What I've realized is as I've been getting older, I naturally have become more conservative because you start valuing your time a lot more as you get older. When you're 20s versus 30s versus 40s, it's like your day is way more valuable as you get older.
Right.
So startups take a lot of time, and as well as money, but really time. That's always something that any startup's going to take. And as I get older, I'm like, I don't know if I can keep putting all this time in. I haven't figured out after this company, what exactly I'm going to do next, but I don't know 100% if I will actually do another startup after this, but we'll see.
We'll stay tuned then. So last question, Patrick, having gone through all the ups and downs, multiple crashes and exits, if you had one piece of advice to give, say someone that wants to do a startup, or maybe someone that is a startup founder that's going through a rough patch or struggling or building a company right now, what would that one piece of advice be?
That's a good question. One piece of advice. I would say at the end of the day, a lot of luck and timing is also involved in this stuff, and it's not always under your control, no matter how smart you are, no matter how hard you work. The one thing that you kind of can control, though, is, and that should always be the highest priority, is your own body and your mind, like your health,
right,
and your stress and all that kind of stuff. Running a startup is stressful. Like, there are a lot of ups and downs, and for most people, there's a lot more downs than ups because most startups will fail, and it can cause lots of stress. It can cause stress in relationships. It can, it can bankrupt you. It can cause health problems. All these kind of things. But so sometimes people overly prioritize a startup, and it's important when you do a startup, especially if you raise money, to really put all your effort in. But you have to balance that against the cost of your mind and your body. And I haven't always done a good job with that, but I'm trying to be better about it. But you've seen startup founders who have committed suicide,
right,
things like that, and it's not worth it. So I would say for people to make sure that they always say the work-life balance, and it's very hard to maintain that kind of balance when you're doing a startup, when you're a startup founder. But really, it's important to make sure that you're not causing so much stress to get into depression, to cause health problems or relationship problems, because that's actually still should be your priority above even your startup.
That's great.
Yeah, I would say would
Great
probably be my
advice.
main advice. And also to kind of on a related note, to try to get some kind of support network around you, either friends, family, other founders, etc. Because it's really tough to do this by yourself, and a lot of times as a tech founder, startup founder, you'll feel very alone. And yeah, maybe you have your co-founders to kind of commiserate with, but they're going through exactly the same thing as you. So when things are bad, it's bad for all of you. So sometimes having a network beyond just the people in your company is good.
Thanks for the sound advice and for the time, Patrick. We're looking forward to seeing the game come out in a few months, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, really appreciate your time on the show. I had a good time catching up with you.
Thank you, Jay.
All right. Take care now.
Take care.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All the show notes and links can be found over at jkimshow.com. Come back often and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Don't forget to join us next week for another exciting episode of The Jay Kim Show. I'd love to hear your comments. You can find me on Twitter at jaykimmer, JAYKIMMER. See you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Hack Your Fitness, the high achiever's guide to getting ripped in under 3 hours a week. If you're anything like me, you're probably working a full-time job or jobs and trying to find time to balance family life, social life, and last but not least, fitness. Look, I get it. I'm a full-time investor and entrepreneur myself, and father of 2. So how am I able to stay fit year-round without spending hours and hours in the gym killing myself on the cardio machine? After struggling for the last 15 years trying every workout and diet under the sun, I finally designed a system that allows me to achieve and maintain single-digit body fat for life in under 3 hours a week. Cardio not required. Head on over to hackyour.fitness and download my free 13-page guide that teaches you the simple science behind efficient fitness and smart nutrition and gives you everything you need to know to finally take control of your life. That's hackyour.fitness.